session is with Michael Grove, the Chief Operating Officer of HotStats. Michael, whereabouts are you? There you are. Michael, great to have you with us, and delighted for the first time that you have joined us as a sponsor as well. So we're delighted with that. And Michael's going to be speaking about the new operating model, I believe, during COVID.
We're going to try to make some assumptions, yes.
Yeah, all right. Great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and what a pleasure it is to be back in Dubai, to be back at AHIC, to be back in front of actual people. And I think more than anything, to be able to start talking about ramping back up to not just profitability, but now starting to talk about getting back to 19 levels, which is already quite exciting. I can't believe we're already here. Before I jump into the slides, my goal today is to provide you with some financial numbers to provide some context for the panel that's going to follow. But I thought I'll start by just giving you a bit of an overview as to who HotStats are, because I'm guessing some of the crowd won't even be familiar with who we are. So we're a company that provides or collects profit and loss data from over 8,000 hotels globally. We collect on a monthly basis, map into the uniform system of accounts, and that enables hoteliers to benchmark profit and loss performance against their competition. And also, we provide insights to the investment community and other stakeholders of the industry. So that's enough about HotStats. The first slide here is looking at the year-to-date performance this year versus last year. It seems a bit silly to be comparing ourselves against where we were last year, but actually there are already stories within these numbers. And I think if we look at where we are, certainly up until July's performance, as we're looking at now, we actually released August data today. We can see already Dubai back to top of the pile, so it's good to see that we've already managed to achieve that coming up the end of the summer months now as well. Of course, Doha and Qatar in general drove profitability right the way through the pandemic, and it was pretty incredible to see from 18 into 19 growth, and then into 20. If it wasn't for the pandemic, it'd be quite interesting to see how profitable hotels in Qatar would have been. Muscat, we're looking at Oman in general, of course, impacted by not just the international travel, but also the interregional travel. And of course, these numbers are slightly inflated for 2020 because the year started quite well. January and February, we actually saw growth on the prior year. So with this mixed into the year-to-date numbers, it's slightly inflated for last year, and actually would have looked a lot worse. So the slide for recovery, what we're looking at here is 2 years so if we're looking at July this month, we're looking against 2 years prior, so July 19, and for every month before that. And what you can see is that where the US are currently sat at around 18% back, but they're heading into a bit of a difficult period. I think the Middle East has seen quite steady growth, and we're looking at around 27% back on where we were back in July 19 as things stand, but of course at a macro level. Luxury hotels were impacted by far the most right the way through the crisis. From the beginning, at the early months, we had this issue of not just the loss of ancillary revenues, the inability to be able to drive a premium, which of course is so important, but this huge cost base. So as the revenues took a nosedive, it was really quite reactionary, and the ability to be able to react to the change in cost base was actually vital for luxury hotels. What it's meant now coming out the other side, though, is as the rate has been driven, the ancillary revenues returned. We've actually been really lucky in the luxury segment now, and this is a global issue. This is right across the pattern right across the globe now. Luxury hotels are coming out the other side much more profitable than we entered the crisis. That's for sure. Most of it's coming from labor. There's no real surprise there. It's our largest cost. And of course, there's a few stories within these numbers, because when you look at the way that different countries reacted to the crisis, you had, in Europe, of course, huge government subsidies to be able to support the cost lines, to be able to maintain the workforce throughout the crisis. And of course, many other regions now are having to buy that resource back, and we're all aware of the issues in the labor market as things stand. The other thing, of course, is the European market and the US market is very much variable. So it's a lot of outsourcing. It's very much driven by a large proportion of variable labor. In the Middle East, of course, it's much more fixed. And that, again, huge challenges in this area where operators and owners were forced to take some tough decisions. But ultimately, many of these changes will probably be quite permanent. From the expense side, it's slightly different because there's a much higher proportion of variable costs. So we've been able to measure these in two different ways. We can look at the fixed costs, of course, and what we think of that will be permanent. And then from a variable cost point of view, as things are ramping back up, what will happen will we be able to break away from the huge volume of fixed costs and turn some of these into variable costs? A few of the variable costs on the screen, some of them you need to take with a pinch of salt. I threw in reception labor because I thought this was quite an interesting one, although not hugely variable in this region, up to 30% drop in reception labor as things currently stand versus prior pandemic levels. Cleaning supplies is no huge surprise to see those increases. We've had to absorb the COVID measures that we've put in place in the hotel bedrooms across the hotel. Housekeeping labor currently is back, and again, that was a fixed department. Again, you go back to Europe and US, it's mostly outsourced. Here in the region, it's still very much a fixed cost absorbed by hotels. And of course, the change in business mix has meant that we have a higher sleeper density in the rooms. We're looking much more at leisure customers. As that mix changes, I think we'll see on a variable level, on a per occupied room level, that changing. The fixed areas of the business are much easier to review. So when we're talking about the undistributed departments, they are very much fixed areas of the business. There are some variable elements to the likes of sales and marketing, which is why those costs look so extreme on the screen. The marketing fees and the franchise fees obviously included in there and linked to revenues, so they will come back. But the 27% change in admin and general costs is huge. And if you look if you see the side of this slide where I'm comparing it to China, you can see what the Middle East hotels generally look like from a cost makeup versus Chinese hotels. In some circumstances, almost double the costs of in the undistributed areas. Some of the key departments I've got on the screen here, again, quite a pattern across the world, but I think so much more for this region that, I'm very familiar with from my time here. We have much larger, after the global financial crisis in Europe and in the US, there were huge scale changes, clustering, centralizing of costs. And in this region, it's not been so prevalent. This is something that I think owners and operators have started to work together on, to be able to look at pooling resources, sensitivities over being able to share resource in areas such as accounting, such as HR, such as sales and marketing. I think we've finally come to that stage. I think this is something that we've seen during the pandemic. There'll be, of course, recruitment challenges, as there are right now, being able to bring labor in from abroad, but also coming out the other side of this, there is a global issue when it comes to the stigma that's been attached to hospitality due to the crisis. I think we're very much overdue these areas of IT related automation that we can put into hotels. But again, I think the industry's been generally quite slow at bringing on board. This pandemic has certainly accelerated that, and therefore I believe many of these costs will be here to stay. All of this comes back to both the break-even analysis that we've been reviewing right the way through the crisis, because of course that was what it was all about. It was about getting back to zero, getting back to black. Of course, now we're talking about ramp up. We want to see how much of this cost change that it was already evident in hotels will remain when revenues ramp up. And of course, then we'll start measuring it in ways of flex and flow. So how much of the incremental revenue will actually drop straight to the bottom line. And as you can see, the break-even point changed dramatically for UAE, more than any other region in the Middle East. Again, a huge element of the fixed costs, the high cost of living in the UAE. And as revenues ramp up, of course, this can only be a good thing, both from a profitability point of view, from a margin point of view, but also the summer months and the low months right across the Middle East, where hotels generally struggle to make a profit at all. So I think the break-even point will be something that will be, that this change to the fixed cost will be something that will be incredibly useful going into those tough months as it is every year. So to wrap it up, I think one key point will be the high level of mix in the revenues. So a total revenue management strategy to be able to capitalize on the demand as things return. We need to be conscious the Middle East is again an outlier when we look at hotels across the world at 58% of rooms revenue. The rest of the revenues, of course, come in through F&B, conference and banqueting, and wellness. The break-even point, I believe there will be slight changes to this. I think this is something that many of the costs are here to stay. It's not like Europe where there are temporary savings gifted through subsidies. This is something that I think we've seen almost tough decisions have been made and it's organic. This is here to stay. If we do achieve what I showed on the screen, this 20 to 30% undistributed payroll change, and even just half of what we've already seen in the undistributed expense lines, we will look at around about 6% margin growth, so 6 percentage points margin growth at GOP. And at that point, I'll hand over to Alison Grinnell, CEO of RAC Hospitality, and her panel.